You're listening to the Feral House Podcast, a semi-regular discussion of books with the authors who wrote them.
Hi, friends. Welcome to another edition of the Feral House Podcast and videocast. I guess we're doing video too. It's kind of fun. So you can see the authors and match the work to their faces. And today I was going to do a little kind of housekeeping, if you will, as the phrase goes. We want your questions. You have a question about Feral House, you can send it to us at info@feralhouse.com, and we will answer them in future editions of the podcast. One of the questions that we will often get is one that is about our catalog. Now, years ago, pre-internet days, we always did a yearly printed catalog. It was fun, and they're expensive, but social media, yuck. I mean, do we have a Feral House present on almost every social media platform? We do. So you can follow us at feral, usually _house, and that's us. And that'll usually be me behind the screen. But, follow us there. We also have a newsletter. So I would suggest going to the Feral House site and signing up for our newsletter. It is our dedicated communication to you once a month, filled with news about authors, sales, books, events, shenanigans, whatever we're up to. It is the most reliable source for Feral House information. And as we get further into the enshittification of the internet, we're less inclined to really want to follow a lot of social media stuff. Tends to be a bit of a cesspool. We are above the fray, so to speak. I'm not chiming in. We usually will thank people on social media, and we appreciate the likes and the comments and all of that stuff. But again, sign up for the newsletter. That's where the real stuff lives. So once again, thank you for paying attention, for listening, for reading, for buying books, for checking books out of the library, for stealing books. We appreciate you. And here is today's episode of the Feral House Podcast. Hi, you guys. It's Christina. I'm back with another episode of the Feral House Podcast. And today, our very special guest is author Jeff Copeland. Jeff wrote a fantastic book for us. It's right behind me. It's right here. It is called Love You Madly, Hollywoodlawn. Should everybody sing? You guys don't want to hear me sing, right? Made Famous is the opening line in Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side. Holly came from Miami, FLA, and that is Hollywoodlawn. Warhol Superstar, for a period of time, starred in movie Trash, as well as live performance Cabaret, and then lit out for Los Angeles and lived in LA for a long time, which is where Jeff Copeland met Holly. So with us today to tell us more about the Holly, his book, his work in life, because actually Jeff's career is really fascinating as well. So welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Christina. It's so nice to be here. I'm very excited.
Oh, this is fun to do. So thanks for making time to talk a little bit more. So first of all, the book is it's getting really good reviews. It featured in Interview magazine. It's upcoming in Huck magazine. It's going to be in the French edition of Harper's Bazaar, as well as you're seeing a lot of the queer press are writing about it. We're just thrilled because we think this is a fantastic story. So how did you meet Holly? And then kind of related to that is you met Holly, you had all these experiences. What made you want to write about Holly?
Well, okay. So, the reason why I met Holly is because I saw her at a party and I was fascinated with her because I couldn't discern her gender. I didn't know what Hollywoodlawn was. And a friend of mine told me she was an Andy Warhol superstar. And at that time, I was trying to make a film. I was trying to launch my career. And I thought, well, maybe this Hollywoodlawn person would be someone, interesting to make a movie with. So I tracked her down. I didn't meet her that night at the party, but I looked her up in the phone book and called her up and asked her out to dinner. I'm very proactive, and assertive. So when I want something, I go for it.
That's, I think, a good trait to have, actually. And so the book is really delightful, and I hope that people consider buying it, reading it, check it out from the library, because it tells a story really that you don't see all the time about friendship, the ups and downs of friendship. Um, and so again, so you met Holly and you had these adventures, which I'm not going to talk a lot about what's in the book because I think everybody should just read it. We're going to talk around it a little bit. So,
Okay.
what made you then want to write about Holly and your experiences with Holly?
Well, basically, I was at the end of my career. My TV career had I was in my 50s and I'd aged out. That's a young person's business, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. And so I went into real estate and did that for 5 years. And, that was just as crazy and just as stressful and pressure filled. And I had just come off a really harrowing deal. And I was so grateful that it had closed and I was getting paid. And I was sitting in my living room having a glass of wine. And I was just kind of like looking over the last 30 years and looking at all, the real estate deals that I did that was very proud of, and then all the TV shows that I worked on, that I was a writer, a producer on, that I was really proud of. But yet no one would ever remember them. Okay. Uh, and then I thought about Hollywoodlawn. And as I thought more and more about Hollywoodlawn, I came to the conclusion that I'd worked with some really wonderful people, um, but no one compared to this magical craziness that I experienced with Hollywoodlawn because it was a long period. It was probably a 3 or 4 year journey, my time with Hollywoodlawn. I
Yeah.
worked with Gary Shandling for a few years doing DVD bonus features for Sony Pictures. That was wonderful. He took me over to Sharon Stone's house, Carol Burnett's house. We met all these great people. But it wasn't, I would go in, we'd do the shoot, and it would be over, right? Lots of fascinating people, but no real relationship. My
Mm.
relationship with Holly it was incredible. And so that night, I just thought, my father had Alzheimer's, and I thought, you really should write all these memories down in case you go down the same rabbit hole. You'll have these memories on paper and someone can read them to you. So but by the time I got to page 100, I was like, well, good grief. What is this? Surely this is not going to be a book because I had no interest in writing a book because books are so much work.
That's a theme. That's a theme. Books are a lot of work. It's not so easy. And so one of the things I purposely buried the lead. So Jeff just wasn't friends with Holly. And mind you, they were very good friends. Jeff also was the ghost writer, so to speak, co-writer of Holly's quote unquote autobiography. I'm using the air quotes because you guys will learn if you've read A Low Life in High Heels, which was published in 91 as the autobiography memoir of Holly Woodlawn. It was Jeff. And you'll find some surprises when you read Jeff's book about his time with Holly as friends, as well as that process of them working together to try to write Holly's book. So, again, that's one of the central kind of pivot pieces in the book of what happens and the crazy adventures. And so Jeff had just mentioned and alluded to his like other careers, and so I'm going to go poke at him a little bit because this is kind of the fun thing. So tell me, I know a little bit, but what was one of the first big projects that you worked on? Because you were not in front of the camera, you were behind the camera person.
Right. I got to Hollywood in 1985 and I was trying to figure out, I thought I wanted to be a writer. And I was kind of overwhelmed. The first movie that I worked on feature was a Josh Brolin movie. It was about skateboarding. It was called Thrashin'. I remember Johnny Depp had come in and auditioned and didn't get the part. And the only reason why I remember that is because people were talking, the casting director and the producer, they were talking about Johnny Depp and how he had just come off, what was it, Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm not even sure if he might have been on 21 Jump Street at that time, but he wasn't a big star yet. But they knew that he was going to be.
Ah,
So interestingly, he didn't get the part. But Josh Roland did. And so I did that, and the director was a guy named David Winters, who was a very accomplished um, dancer, choreographer from Broadway. He did huge stuff. He was in the original Gypsy with Ethel Merman, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, no, very, very accomplished.
Yeah.
And then the producer was Alan Sachs, and he produced Welcome Back, Kotter. So I was very, very excited to be working with these people. And I write about this in the book, but I don't talk about I don't think I've mentioned the name of the movie or the people.
No,
Uh,
you didn't. That's why I figured I was going to poke at you a little bit so we can get some like inside scoop on some of these stories.
yeah, and they were nuts. It was just all crazy. And here's the deal. I was working 7 days a week for $200 flat
Oh,
rate, no overtime. And basically what happened was my car was breaking down. I needed some more money. And an art director I had worked with on some previous projects that were much smaller, he asked if I'd be available to do a commercial, short film. Actually, it was a short film for Playboy, and it paid really well. It paid 150 bucks a day. And I needed that money to fix my car. And the production manager would not let me have time off. So I said, okay, I got to go. And I got a job at a department store working in men's clothing for $5 an hour. It paid 200 bucks a week for only 40 hours of, right? And then I did that commercial, which got my car fixed. So yeah, it was
so
very abusive. The
So
whole
I think that that's something that, if fans of Feral House for a long time will probably remember that Adam talked about his dad a lot, and that's Jessica's father as well, obviously, is because Woodrow Parfrey was a character actor in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, started in New York, then went to Hollywood. And one of the things that, if you heard Adam talk about his dad at all, was that there is a great chasm between fame and a working professional, whether it's an actor, scenic, behind the crew, producerial, is that it's a lot of work. It's a grind. And the stories that Jeff's telling is that's always the amazing thing to me, is it can look like it's overnight success or somebody just came out of nowhere, but very rarely it's someone really working really, really hard. And I think that's what you mentioned earlier, kind of age out. I mean, it takes a toll. So when you start working the commercials, and then was it an easy natural progression to the next projects?
No, no, because what would happen is I would do a commercial or I'd do a project, and then it would be over, and you'd have to hustle the next one. And I remember I did land a good gig on a commercial, and I got fired after the first day because I didn't know Los Angeles. And back in those days, if they're sending you to run these errands, these art directors, and you got this big book called the Thomas Guide, and you're trying to figure out where you're going. I mean, it would take me forever to get anything done. So it was really hard for me to get established. And essentially what happened was this is where a lot got cut out of the story, because in my original manuscript, Hollywoodlawn didn't come in until like page 160. There was that much struggle in the first 3 years before I met her,
Yeah.
and it was just hard. It was hard to just to keep the momentum. I remember I was up for a job with Pee Wee Herman. He needed an assistant, and I don't think I really write about this in this new draft. I think a lot of it got cut out, but I went to Warner Brothers. I had the interview. He liked me a lot, and then I didn't get the job, but he did hire me to work in his fan club. I did. This is Christmas time. For 2 days, I sent out Christmas cards, and he paid me good money to do it. I remember getting that money because I was able to live off of it for a month. It paid the rent, it paid, gave me food. And but then once that was over, I mean, I didn't have anything else to go to. So eventually, so Pee Wee Herman was in December. I think it was probably in March when I landed a production assistant gig over at Paramount, and I was on a TV show
Hmm.
called Brothers. And at Brothers, we'd work. Back then it was like you would work so many weeks, and then you'd go on what was called hiatus, and they'd bring it in another show. So I did Brothers, and I worked on one called Hard Knocks with Bill Maher. Um, Something called Marblehead Manor. Some of this shit was just unforgettable.
Yeah, I mean,
So bad.
yeah, if you remember the TV wasteland of the 80s and 90s, it was definitely a TV wasteland. There's a lot of crap out there.
A
I
lot of
remember
crap.
growing up on it. So I wanted you to talk about this a little, this background, because I really wanted folks who didn't work in Hollywood or aren't from Los Angeles to really understand that anybody who's got any kind of name, if you see a name credit in a TV show or movie, oh man, did they work really hard to get there. And so I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So you met Holly, and so essentially Holly was doing the same thing you were in a way. I mean, the grind, trying to get work, auditioning, doing those things. Can you share a little bit more about before you started working together with Holly about what Holly was doing to survive in LA?
Well, I was horrified when I found out that Holly was prostituting. Okay. I don't know how, I mean, honestly, I don't know what Holly was thinking when she came to LA. I know that New York, the cabaret scene was dead. Things had shifted. And so people started migrating from New York to Los Angeles. And and so that's how Holly wound up there. But Holly couldn't, cabaret wasn't she wasn't able to make a living doing cabaret. Okay. Matter of fact, because there's so many expenses involved in cabaret.
Mm,
You got to pay your music director, your band, there's rehearsal time. She didn't do very well. So essentially what happened was, I mean, when I first got together with Holly, we started working, or I started writing immediately the script that I want to make with her, but I don't think she really made much of a living, and that's why she disappears. Remember, she totally like
hmm.
vanished. Yeah, and this is way
Yeah,
before there's internet. So
yeah.
how do you find Hollywoodlawn? Hell if I know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm asking because it paints a picture is like so maybe so younger listeners may not this pre-internet times, all of us old folks, posting posters on a telephone pole or mail, sending postcards to each other, and all the games playing for trying to call collect without actually having to pay for a call. There were so many tricks, whether to try to save that money
Right.
and still make your art. So one of the things that in your story, your personal story, and then in the book, Love You Madly, Hollywoodlawn, um, are some of the hijinks. And those hijinks, I'm calling them hijinks, are really poverty driven of things that poor people do. And I'm working class, man. I've been there. Is just to get a meal, to get by. Can you share with us like with some of your one of your favorite kind of like hustle stories about that you guys did, whether parties or events and things in LA to just kind of have fun and get by?
Yeah, well, so once word got out amongst the publicists and the magazines that Hollywoodlawn was in town, we started getting a lot of really cool party invitations. All the magazines would have parties back then, and they would usually have them at restaurants, and they were all catered. So there was plenty of free food and plenty of free wine, and we would go to as many of those parties as we could, you know. And because that's how we got to eat something other than macaroni and cheese. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's you've got to take it where you can get it. I think it's always really funny because that's a universal experience of whether it's an opening, a literary opening, or these parties. Is yeah, you there's always folks who are there for the free meal and then the booze.
Yeah, you did try to
Always.
have big pockets so you could slip a few giblets in it, but no one was looking. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Have some for later.
I approve. I fully approve.
Well, that's
So
why I
I
got
want
Holly that ukulele case so she could use it as a purse. Because I mean, the thing was, Holly could cram it all full of all kinds of stuff, cupcakes, whatever we needed.
perfect. This is akin to, this kind of very much the vibe in Feral House. We can, kind of come from this punk rock background. So, you're speaking our language. Now, Feral House does have this reputation of publishing really more true transgressive type stories. So I want to lean into that. I like to always talk about why. One of the reasons that we wanted to work with Jeff in this book is I read this story and and I was like, oh my God, this is so much fun and it's so crazy. And yet at the same time, it's talking about these real issues of being really dirt poor, trying to make art. And Holly existing as a transgender pioneer. Folks may think that's kind of an odd thing for us, but if you think back to our work with Genesis P. Orridge, um, who identified themselves as pandrogynous. And so there's these great artistic precedents of people rejecting narrative norms, gender norms, to essentially create themselves in the vision that they wanted. So I'm going to go back and say, so was the when you talk about spending time with Holly and going to parties and doing things, was it ever really an issue for being with Holly, of that Holly as a trans person essentially was, did people just accept Holly for being Holly, or did you witness, or did you guys encounter issues being out in public together? And again, being work partners and business partners and friends that way.
Well, let's see. So I know we did encounter some homophobia. I'm trying to, we definitely encountered that when Holly wasn't dressed up.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to think, and every now and then Holly was striking, okay? But there was that one time, one of the first parties I got Holly invited to, it was the Lou Rawls charity event, star-studded, right? And my boss, well, she was one of my coworkers, sort of my boss. She freaked out because she saw Holly and she came over to me and she kind of like tugged on my arm and she said, "That is not a woman." I said, "What do you mean?" I didn't, because I acted like I didn't know what she was talking about. I acted like I didn't even know Holly because I got Holly invited to this big event. This is really before Holly and I, well, we were working together, but it's before we had any sort of success. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
And this woman was just having a fit. That is not a woman. And she wouldn't let it go. She was like a dog with a bone. And she kept
Wow.
looking closer and, oh, she'd look and then she'd run away and she'd get a closer look and then she'd come back. That is not a woman. I'm like, oh, Jesus. Well, what do you say?
Yeah, I think you don't say anything, honestly, or just like, well, okay. And I brought it up because I think that, obviously in the current political environment, trans people are not by choice in that the political forefront, and have become like fodder for the very right wing kind of agitation. And that's why I was asking. I was curious because Holly was, working as a trans actress, and from my research and then even reading your work, is that Holly was able to exist and work and thrive, and it was never really an issue per se, except for like kind of like, as you point out, just isolated, instances. It seems to me that this is the issue of trans has been ginned up of late to kind of become a scapegoat for some sort of misplaced Christo-fascist, angst. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and so, and that again is another reason why we wanted to publish this book, because if you know Feral House, you know us. Our stance on any type of mainstream governmental, anything that oppresses people, anti-First Amendment, we are middle fingers up. First Amendment all the way. And that means telling everybody's stories, especially those folks who don't always have the ability to tell the story themselves. So I'm going back to, Jeff wrote this really wonderful book. It's entertaining. You don't have to be interested in, queer issues. This is just a really great story. And some of the images that Jeff found, whether his own personal pics and as well as some of the archival fashion photos that Holly did, incredible, as Jeff mentioned earlier, just Stunning, stunning. So I'm going back to Jeff. So you know us now. We've been working together. What made you decide to send us your manuscript?
Well, that was a no-brainer. But before I go down that road, I want to mention something about the whole diversity inclusion issue in
Okay.
the country right now. And what really has aggravated me is that if you pay attention, and people don't pay attention, that's the problem. But if people, teachers, high school principals, were to read Love You Madly, Hollywoodlawn, okay? The first chapter sets up what it's like to be a bullied, misfit child. And unfortunately, I think what happens, like in Holly's case, bullied, misfit kid, couldn't get support at home or in school, ran away from home and became a street urchin and had to, prostitute to survive. I mean, I think there's a lot of PTSD that's involved with that kind of trajectory. And it's a shame that people don't recognize that if you don't take care of these people, they're going to be, what do they have? You know what I mean? They're
I
driven to,
do. I do.
yeah, and
Yeah.
especially a child, it really bothers me because I feel like people don't want to know. They don't want to know the truth.
They don't. Most people don't, and that's one of the reasons Feral House we're here to tell these stories and the research and investigations on these like little smaller stories about, but really when you put it all together, that make up American culture. Because trans wasn't invented in 1970. Throughout history, there's been, people who the parts don't match the brain, and is the most simple way to view it. And we are embodied in our First Amendment. We get to be whoever we want to be. There is no rule. There is no law to say you can't do it until now that they're trying to legislate this morality. And we, Feral House, are against any type of legislated morality. And I agree with you, Jeff, it is starts early. Everyone can think back. If you think back to your own childhood experiences, there was probably that one kid in your class that was just a little not mainstream. Maybe whether it was maybe they were, now we're finding out so much more about autism. That kid, the weird kid, maybe that was someone, who just needed a little extra time, or ADHD, or someone who was, even at the youngest age, knew that they were queer. I mean, everything we do about public schooling, especially parochial, even worse, is about just training workers. It's not really about education. That's my little rant. And so they need to get all of these square pegs to fit into the round holes, and they're going to pound them down until they do. And you're going to splinter and break a lot of people in the process. And that goes to what you're saying is about being bullied and Holly bullied and running away, and there's no support services. And you become, instead of becoming what you potentially could be, you become something else. And I think it's a credit to Holly to that she gained and earned as much success as she did, given the hurdles and challenges that she faced in every aspect of her life. So I want to go back to, I asked that two-part question earlier. We addressed the first part. And then the second part, I really wanted to know is what made you pick Feral House? Why us?
Well, so I think what I did, you'll edit this. It was I was looking for a publisher who, would go for a book like, this is a very specific genre. Not everybody wants this kind of book. Now, I knew Feral House. I've got the Homicide Detective scrapbook, okay, which I'm not even sure when that came out. Do you remember that book? The Homicide Detective?
Absolutely. I think it's up here, the great Sean Teggerace,
Oh my
and with
God.
Catherine Dunn. And it's still in print. We're going to keep that one in print. But if you're in prison, don't order it. They won't let you get it in prisons. So stop, don't order it. Don't waste your money.
It's
But
a
yeah,
fascinating story because, I love estate sales and I love thrift shops. And to think that this was found at an estate sale, by
yeah.
somebody, it was just wow. Anyway, but cutting to the chase, what I would do is I went to Feral House's website and, I was friendly with Vampira because she lived in my neighborhood and I bought Sandra Nemi's book. Did I say her name right?
Yes, that's,
Good.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay. And
When we
so
worked on Glamour Ghoul, we all learned a lot of Finnish pronunciation.
okay. Well, I read Glamour Ghoul and I was riveted. And I thought, and then I knew about the Ed Wood book, and I thought, well, Hollywoodlawn just fits in here. To me, it wasn't a hard sell. With other publishers, I was trying to figure out the angle, right, on why they would be interested. And so yeah, I just felt like it was a great fit. And I remember it wasn't easy getting into Feral House, and but I kept going back to Feral House. I would
Poked
circle
us a few
around.
times. You
Yeah,
poked us a few times.
yeah,
So
and I
yeah,
got an
and
offer from another publisher, and I thought I knew instinctively that Feral House was the way I wanted to go, and so this is going to sound crazy, but on the day I was ready to accept that other offer, I got the uh, email from Jessica. Because it took forever to get this book to get it launched. I mean, with the publisher, we're talking
yeah.
years.
Oh yeah, I think that's something that folks don't always realize is just how long the process can take and in previous interviews, people may have heard me talk about is like that we have to create the data for a book almost, 18 to 24 months in advance, but that's discounting the whole process of editing. And then that's just not even counting how long the writer on their own did the research and the writing. So a lot of times when you see a book come out, the author has been working on this 5, 10 years, sometimes a lifetime. So one of the things that I'm going to grab the copy of the book too is, I mentioned earlier some of the pictures and the images, and um, aside from the other images of Holly, is we had a lot of fun, and that's one thing when you were working with Feral House is we look at this as a collaborative thing. And so I'm going to just point that I don't know how well everybody can see, but Jeff had this great idea of wanting to incorporate old Hollywood imagery. And we love that idea. And our designer, this is a Ron Kretsch book, he designed this one, is we think it turned out fun. And that's something that we like to do is we look at this, we understand how much time the writer has put into it. And I know most writers, the last thing they want to do is just hand it off and then, come back a year later for a book. So um, talk about the process a little bit. Were you afraid to work with us at all? Or was there anything you can tell me now? Was there something you really wanted that I said no to?
I don't think you said no. Not really. No, you know what? I think it all was you were very encouraging. That's what I really liked about it. My idea with the illustrated cover, that was a mistake. I fully admit it. So we had to go down that road for a little bit. But I'm so happy with the way it turned out. And it's because it's a Hollywood story, right? And I thought that those images would be a lot of fun, and you were on board with that. And
Yeah,
I think it gives it such another layer.
I do too, and that's what we just love, and that's something we love. We've mentioned always before. We love great design, and that we love our designers, and we love the creative. A book is a creative thing. It's more than just the text. If we are in a material culture, it is a physical object, and so again, beautiful books, good-looking books are important to us. I'll mention
I
too
would
is like
have never gotten that creativity with another publisher. I know that for a fact. I mean, I look
yeah, I
back
know.
when Holly and I were working with St. Martin's Press, we didn't have any input at all. It just one day the book showed up and it was done.
Yeah, and that's we like the creativity. That's where we're all in this. We make books for this reason. And one of the things I do want to mention too is it has a lovely foreword by our friend Simon Doonan. And Simon was so fun. We had a long, overlong coffee lunch in New York, and I was telling him about this project, and he had Holly stories. He had other stories from other Warhol superstars. And he lived in LA in those punk years. And so he knew exactly those apartment buildings, those seedy locations, and he knew it all and was so excited to kind of share his stories of his experience as a young poor gay man in Hollywood, as well as in his work with some of the other Warhol superstars. So it's a really, I think, a lovely kind of compliment to Jeff's work as well. So I want to bring up one small sad thing is a lot of great other writers and queer writers have been behind your work, and you've gotten so much great support. And I want to acknowledge, yeah, that we recently lost Felice Picano.
Well, so here's what happened. I have a good friend of mine. Her name is Dawn Moreno Friedman, and Dawn worked at the West Hollywood Library, and she would see Felice all the time, and she would take writers' workshops with him. And she mentioned to Felice that I was working on this book, and she put us in touch. And he was very supportive, and he took me under a wing, and he tried to help me get a publisher. And I was so touched by this. And when he read the manuscript, he was just so complimentary, and just so supportive. So I felt like that was a gift from the universe, really.
Definitely. It's a wonderful imprimatur to have that. And so we're thrilled that Felice was able to read the book and endorse it. And of course, we all mourn the passing. I mourn the passing of any artists, that way is when we lose artists, writers, creative people, culturally, something, is lost forever. But it goes back to, so when you started about memory and starting to work on the book and the process, and you talked about the evolution of the book itself from kind of just you as a memoir for yourself, it kind of evolved into more of a pocket memoir of just a short period of your lived experience. Do you see that was more challenging for you to write than just the overarching bigger story, to just try to take a snapshot versus the whole thing?
Well, you know what? So here's what happened. So as I started hammering out these pages, and by the time I got to page 400, I realized that my story with Holly had a very traditional 3-act structure and an arc. It has everything there. It has the conflict, so many conflicts, the big climax, and then the resolution. And then what happened was the real ending that I go with now, that came after I'd finished the 400 pages. That was really quite magical how that came about.
So tell me one of your one of your favorite anecdotes, the adventure that you had written out in that 400 pages that got cut. What's the story that you, for whatever reason, you decided that, oh, I can't actually put that in print? Because I want you to whisper. Tell me that one.
Well, the truth is, I think I think all my Holly stories wound up, and
Yeah.
all my Holly stories are in the book.
Wow.
Um,
And
the
there's
one
some
that
great stories in there.
Yeah, because I had so many Holly stories, and I didn't want to forget any of them. Um, I'll tell you who
It's
got cut out was, originally, this was the story of not just me and Holly, but there were other characters as well who were in our lives. And one of them was my friend Michael. And Michael was, he had all these hilarious sex stories. And it just seemed like every time me and Michael got together, he was telling me all these whacked out gay sex stories that he was involved in. And so I had a chapter. The whole purpose of the chapter really was to show how within the gay community, there was this it was discrimination. It was very divided how gays treated transgender people. I remember because me and Holly lived over at the Las Palmas apartments, and a few blocks over was this gay nightclub called Probe. And there was a huge protest one night because the drag queen, well, all the gays, right, were in an uproar because Probe wouldn't allow men in drag to enter their bar.
Wow.
Total discrimination, right? And this was in the 1990s. And there was a huge protest. And I went over, I couldn't believe the noise I was hearing. So I went over to check it out. And, there were all these big muscle-bound leather guys, and then all these other gays just ranting and raving with their signs and carrying on. And so I actually wrote about that. And I wrote about the Yukon Mining Company, where a lot of the transgender folks would hang out. And basically what that chapter was, it was like a combination of various events that all came together and had a very distinct point about gay on gay discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it just didn't fit. So
Right.
Out the window.
Yeah, sometimes that happens. I've written too, and then you spend a lot of time and you write it, and then you're like, it just doesn't work. You have to be absolutely ruthless with editing to make sure you have to serve the story and make sure the story's working. That's always it's always a challenge, and it's a little heartbreak. And that's why I always go back and say, what's out? What did you have to cut? One of the things to talk about is, as we kind of come to the end of our conversation, is the book is out. We're going to be doing events in New York in June, and we're still scheduling events. We're looking to get out to Los Angeles, at some time. We'll of course let everybody know. Subscribe to the newsletter. That's your best source of information. So we're working on definitely promoting the book, and you're going to see it in more press and more interviews and more pictures. So keep your eyes open. But Jeff, what are you working on now? Are you working on, or are you just, enjoying your retirement and, going to thrift stores?
Well, I wish there were good thrift stores out here. There aren't any, unfortunately. But what I want to do is, there was a screenplay that I wrote that Madonna optioned. It's called A Long Hair Depression. And it's the story of my childhood, being this little misfit kid living in this little redneck part of the country. And I'm novelizing that. So I wrote a whole bunch of pages, and then I just needed to take a break, But that's my goal. I thought, I had so many, there were so many disappointments in the Hollywood game. One was a lowlife in high heels. At the end of the day, that was a huge, crushing debacle. And Love You Madly, Hollywoodlawn allowed me to take something that was just wrong and make it right. Totally flip it around. And that's what I want to do with all the stories, all the screenplays that I wrote, because they were all really, really fun, good scripts. And it's a shame that they're sitting in boxes. So I'm going to give them all life.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And well, and a reminder to everybody out there, we don't publish fiction, but we'll definitely, help Jeff, because we want to see those stories in print. They might not be by us, and they may not be a good fit, but I'm confident that folks are going to be able to read these stories from Jeff, because one, he is tenacious, does not give up. And two, he is a damn good writer. It's a lot of the it's funny, even at the lowest moments in Love You Madly, Hollywoodlawn. You're laughing through tears because it's just that funny. So please consider buying a copy, go into your library, check it out. Libraries are fantastic, and libraries help us too. So that you're not hurting us if you check out a book from the library, you're helping us. Jeff, anything that you want to share about the writing experience, about Holly, anything? You've got the final word here.
The final word would be I think what's important is to just go for it, to follow your dreams. If you're dreaming of it, it's meant to be a reality. Don't squander it. No.
Yep.
We only have so much time on this earth.
Yeah.
And it's a shame to me because I moved back to where I came from to look after my parents, and I see how people just don't do anything. They don't follow their dreams. They think about it, but it's too much work. My thing is, or they're afraid they're going to fail. And my take is, failure is temporary. That heartbreak, that disappointment is temporary, but the regret of having not tried is going to last a lifetime.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Never say no to yourself. That's what I would say. Don't say no to yourself. Let somebody else tell you no. Don't do it to yourself.
Exactly.
So Jeff, thank you so much for spending some time talking about the book, the process, your life, your other work. Thank you so much for sending us your manuscript. We're proud of this one. We're proud of all our books, but this one's special. It's a great story. And again, I encourage people to pick it up. Take a chance. Even if you think it's not what you would normally read, or even if you think it's not like, which topic of the Feral House books you like, pick this one up. It'll surprise you. So again, thanks for listening. Tune in probably next month for our next Feral House podcast. Thanks again to Jeff Copeland, author of Love You Madly, Hollywoodlawn. And everyone, have a fantastic time. And please don't send me your poetry. Don't. Thank you.
Hey fiends, thanks for listening to the Feral House podcast. We do this about once a month, talking to Feral House and Process Media writers, as well as members of the extended Feral family. You're part of the family. Let us know if you have any questions or if you have an idea of someone we should talk to. You can send me a note at press@feralhouse.com, PRESS @feralhouse.com.